If you could go back in time and change one thing that you've done in the past, what would it be? This is a question I've asked myself probably a million times. And for many suicide loss survivors, I'm sure this is a question they've also asked themselves. Would he still be here if only I had checked in that day? Would he still be here if only I had noticed something was off? Would he still be here if only I was physically there with him? If only, if only, if only. On 20th October in 2017, I was woken up around 4 a.m. to a frantic knocking at the door. It was the police, and they were there to tell me that my husband had passed away from a suspected suicide. He had gone out with friends that evening to celebrate a friend's birthday, but he never made it home. 4 years later, I still ask myself this question: what could I have done differently that day to keep him alive? But I know the answer is not that simple. I know it's not just one thing I could have done, because I know that I've done and I've tried to do many things over the course of 3 years. You see, I knew that he struggled with bipolar II disorder, a mental health condition that could take him from being the life of the party, cracking jokes with friends in one moment, to being filled with despair, feeling like he was the only person in the world and that nobody understood him, and having suicidal thoughts in the next. In a way, I was lucky that he even shared with me that he struggled with his mental health condition, because I know many other suicide loss survivors carry guilt because they didn't even suspect that their loved one was struggling with anything. I tried for years to persuade him to seek professional help, but it took a really long time. And finally, he agreed to see a psychiatrist. And 2 weeks before he passed away, he had just started taking medication. I remember at that time thinking I was really relieved that he had finally taken the first steps toward recovery. The day before he passed away, I even accompanied him to see the doctor, who told us that his case was not even the worst that he had encountered. But still, that did not keep him alive today. I took on a job with a very flexible schedule. I made myself as available as possible so that I could be there physically in times of crisis, whenever or wherever that would be. And in a way, that did help. I was able to physically stop him from hurting himself several times. I've literally grabbed a razor from his hands. I've literally stopped him from jumping out a window. On the times I couldn't be there, I was able to take a call late at night and talk him out of ending his life. I took every possible situation seriously, but still I was trying to do that all by myself. The reality is that suicide prevention is a continuous battle. One person can change the course of things in one night, but what happens after that? What if there's another attempt? And there can be many more attempts if one's mental health condition is not treated or managed properly. I have also learned that suicide prevention cannot just be done by one single person. There needs to be a community of support. There needs to be time. It takes time to find out the right dosage or mix of medication that works for one's individual brain or one's individual circumstances. It takes time to find the right treatment. It also takes money. It's expensive to pay for medical treatment, especially if it's going to be over a long term. And it takes also a cultural shift, an understanding that you can seek help before you're absolutely broken. There were times of crisis where I really should have called a suicide prevention hotline and sought support, but I was afraid of what would happen. I wasn't sure, would he get arrested for attempted suicide, because at that time suicide was not yet decriminalized in Singapore. I was afraid that he would be institutionalized, and that was his fear as well. He thought that if he was sent to an institution, that would appear in his records like a black mark. And I didn't want to put him through what he feared the most. I should have told friends and family who could have supported him, who could have been there in times of crisis, who could have been there to keep an eye out on him when I wasn't available. But he wanted to keep things a secret. He didn't want anyone to know what he was going through. And he went through great lengths to keep it a secret, even from his own family. He was afraid that people would treat him differently if they knew. They would judge him. He was afraid that it would affect him at work, that his clients, his investors would not think that he was capable enough. And in a way, those fears were not unfounded. There are still plenty of people who don't believe that people with mental health conditions can hold a proper job, can even run their own company, or can be good, loving partners. Even when he agreed to see a psychiatrist, he was reluctant. He thought that the medication that was supposed to fix the chemical imbalances in his brain would change him as a person, that he wouldn't be able to think clearly or be as creative or productive or as smart as he usually was. Whenever we heard about celebrity suicides in the news, he would get triggered. He thought that maybe that too was his inevitable fate. Stories of hope are much harder to come by. They're not as sensational. They don't attract as many clicks. And so he didn't have a point of reference to realize that there are lots of people who live well and live meaningful lives, even with a mental health condition. You see, all this conditioning in his mind had been happening years before even we had met, years before he even knew he had a mental health condition. Even though my husband was born in the UK and grew up there, his family was Cantonese, and so he grew up with cultural ideas that are similar across many Asian cultures. Men need to be strong. Men cannot be vulnerable. One must appear well in front of others. As a Filipino, I grew up with similar ideas. The thought of talking about your personal problems with other people outside of the family would be like hanging your dirty laundry for others to see. But protecting your family is important, and your family image is important. So we end up keeping things like grief and mental health as a taboo topic. Seeking treatment is hard enough, but when you internalize stigma and you internalize shame, it makes it much harder to benefit from treatment that you might need. Stigma thrives in the darkness. When you don't understand something, you fear it, and you create misconceptions. You think that you might be alone in the world. However, stigma dies in the light. When we talk about it, when we educate ourselves, we learn that we're not alone. We learn that there's a community to support us, and things are not as scary as they seem. We need these conversations. We need conversations in the workplace to understand that it's okay to ask for help, ask for a break without fear of losing your job. We need stories of hope. We need to educate ourselves. All these things can help to break the stigma eventually. After my husband passed away, I made the decision to speak openly about mental health and my own journey of being a suicide loss survivor. Even if it made me, with my years of cultural conditioning, uncomfortable. I co-founded the organization Calm Collective Asia as a way to create conversations that I wish my husband Tyler could have heard. Conversations to let people know that they are not alone. Conversations which they can take out in their own communities and continue with their colleagues, with their friends, with their families. By speaking out and being vulnerable about my own story, I've had many other people come to me with their own stories as well. Stories of people going through and living with a mental health condition, eventually thriving. Stories of people going through their own grief and suicide loss. Stories of people going through unspeakable trauma. And also stories of people going through miscarriage or infertility, losses which have no funeral to mark them, which nobody else knows about. And what I've learned is that Everybody carries their own burdens, some heavier than the others. But how would we ever know who needs our support if we never ask for help ourselves? I know now that even if I had a time machine and I could go back in time to a time when Tyler was still alive, I know that I alone could not have kept him alive today. What I needed was for him to be comfortable to seek help before things got out of hand. What I needed was for him to have had these conversations to help him undo the cultural conditioning that led him to stigmatize his own mental health. I wish I could tell you that this is it. Open conversations are the key to suicide prevention, but it's not that simple. Mental health is complex, and like physical health, different people need different types of treatment. But conversations are a good place to start. Small conversations can lead to greater outcomes, like policy change at the government level, in the workplace. It can lead to greater funding for mental health research. It can create new avenues for accessible treatment. Or it can inspire people to do the very simple thing of just asking people, how are you? Checking in with their colleagues and friends and family, not once, but often, and not reactively, but proactively. Every year, we observe World Suicide Prevention Day on 10th September. But I hope that this talk has taught you that there are many avenues for us to participate toward suicide prevention. And it's not just one thing that we should have done that we can do, and it shouldn't just be for one day. Thank you.